Good morning and welcome back to What's Going On with Earl Ingram. I am excited as always to have an opportunity to come before you, the listening audience, but I'm doubly excited, triply excited. Is that such a word as triply?
Triply. Well,
I guess
yeah,
I
let's
just
go with it.
created it, right? because a really good friend and a very brilliant man has chosen to be my guest once again. None other than Mr. Sandy Williams. Hey, good morning to you, Sandy. How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty well. Good morning to you, Earl.
You look, you know, you look really nice, man. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I got new lighting last week when we did this. I turned into the ghost of Christmas past.
Are you sure it's not the rouge that you put on your cheeks?
Yeah, I don't. It's not orange and it's not red. No, I didn't. I
Man, go ahead.
no, 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 no. I stood at the desk there at the cosmetic counter just for hours trying to figure out.
Sandy, it's nice to have a little fun because we are going to have a very serious conversation as we always do, but a little humor, a little fun is always good. Um, Sandy, we're going to talk about healthcare, and I think in a manner that people can understand. I'm a person who listens to the conversations on healthcare, and I don't understand anything about what is being said except for we are facing difficult times once again as it relates to healthcare. Why is it, Sandy, that we can't get this fixed?
Well, I think it's because the system that evolved after World War II in the United States is totally unique. I mean, for whatever reason, whereas most countries decided that healthcare was essentially a public good, and that the government would be in the middle of making sure that healthcare would be available to everyone. In the United States, after World War II, the employers were the source of healthcare, and so if you got a job, your employer put you on their Blue Cross Blue Shield employee plan, and you had healthcare. And for a period up until about 1970, the cost of healthcare was not flying up particularly rapidly. Uh, People were well employed in the country, and if you had a job, I mean, we can all remember the fact that if you got a job, healthcare was just part of the deal. You got a
Right,
job, they gave you a health card, and you could go to the doctor, and things were covered.
right,
And that's just totally unique and totally different than every other country in the world. I mean, literally every other developed country. And so we ended up with this system of third party payor insurers who earn their money by charging people premiums for healthcare. And the profits they would get would be a percentage of the premiums. And so the healthcare companies the insurance companies didn't really want premiums to go down. They wanted premiums to go up because the higher the premiums, the more the profit they would earn. And premiums are based on last year's healthcare costs. And so they didn't really have an incentive to fight to cut down the cost of healthcare. In fact, they really, if you looked into it, they had an incentive to have the cost of healthcare go up. The only thing they wanted to make sure was that next year's healthcare costs fell within their prediction of what they would be so that their premiums would more than cover it and they could earn their profit. And so, in a period of rising premiums, that just meant that next year healthcare costs would be more than last year, but they would be predictable. And so, we built this system in which the hospitals didn't have an interest in driving down the cost of healthcare because they were the recipients of the healthcare dollars. And the insurance companies, the people paying it, didn't have an incentive either So we had a system in which the incentives were basically to cause healthcare costs to get higher, not lower. And lo and behold, the system has followed the incentives, and the cost of healthcare in the United States has flown up more rapidly than the cost of healthcare in any other developed country. We devote now about 20% of our total GDP to healthcare, and it's a rising number, not a falling number. And that's almost twice as much as the next highest number, which I think is Germany. I think Germany devotes something like 12% of its GDP to healthcare. And so we end up having very expensive health care, and it's not only that, but it's getting more expensive. And our insurance process, the way in which employers were covering for insurance, began to fall apart in the 1990s when employers decided they wanted to cut back on their cost of benefits, and they began to shift healthcare costs to the employees, causing healthcare to be a shared expense with employees instead of just a provided benefit. And ever since then, many employers have tried to figure out how they could avoid paying healthcare benefits. For instance, hourly employees who work less than, I think it's 34 and a half hours a week, aren't necessarily entitled to healthcare benefits. And so we find that many people working in the hourly industry, surprisingly, are told by their employees that they shouldn't work more than 34 and a half hours a week.
You know, Sandy, while as you stated earlier, you talked about the '90s and the times, you know, when our healthcare system was affordable and working. We are now at a point where baby boomers, Sandy, uh, are really, you know, we're living longer, we're sicker. It costs more money to keep us moving and going. Um, and so, is that one of the reasons why the system is more costly?
Well, what happened was until we had Medicare and Medicaid and we had these kind of requirements for what would be included within healthcare, cost was an object that was considered by those people providing healthcare because uh, people would be concerned about paying or couldn't consider paying $300,000 a year for a course of medication that was effective but was terribly expensive. And so we ended up with big pharma and the people who make medical equipment realizing that under the principles of health insurance, and as particularly as provided by Medicare and Medicaid, if a form of healthcare is efficacious meaning that it works, that it provides effective either testing or effective diagnostic work or effective therapeutic results, then it is to be covered. And so that led to the development of kinds of medical treatment and kinds of medical diagnosis, which were terrifically expensive, very sophisticated, but terrifically expensive. And there was no incentive for the people providing it to try and figure out how to drive the cost down. So, it used to be that to have an MRI, it would cost thousands of dollars to have an MRI test. Now, that has been driven down by the introduction of specialized MRI shops who will only do MRIs, and they'll do an MRI now for about $500. And so, competition and market pressure could drive the cost of healthcare in the United States down, but the insurers have taken steps to make sure that there is little or no competition. For instance, insurance companies have negotiated deals with all the hospitals that if a patient is insured, then they will pay 50% of the bill. The insurance company will get away with paying 50% of the announced price by the healthcare provider, and that will satisfy the bill. If you aren't insured and you're a patient, you're going to be asked to pay 100%. And that 100% is unnaturally high. I mean, it's not even a realistic price. I had I had a procedure once that, we're all old. We can all talk about our medical stuff. I had a procedure, 1 day procedure in a hospital where the announced bill was $135,000, and the insurance company paid under $30,000 and settled it. That was it. So it didn't really cost 135. It cost 30. But so we have this system now where the payors, the insurance company, are making sure that you have to be insured in order to have an affordable or even close to affordable price. Uh, and you can't pay cash and avoid paying the full price. And so that cuts down the ability for there to be market pressure other than whatever it is insurance companies and Medicare negotiate. And one of the problems with Medicare and Medicaid and the government is that lobbyists are so powerful that they've tied the hands of the government in its capacity to negotiate low cost for medical care.
Sandy, several months back, I wound up going to the emergency, and I got there at about 8 a.m. Might have been a little earlier than that. And I forgot what it was, but they ran. I didn't get to leave there until 6 p.m. I got there at 8 a.m. at the emergency.
Yeah.
They ran cardiograms twice. When I first came, when I left, they took blood at least 4 different times. They ran every test known to man, Sandy, on me. I only have Medicare. So my thing is, they ran all these different tests. And yes, it cost an awful lot of money. And you know what they said after I was there from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m.? Okay, everything checks out. Go see
They,
your own doctor.
Yeah, they said, "Thank you very much, sir."
but
I mean, the
I mean,
fact
Sandy,
that,
that's part of it. Isn't that part of the issue?
yes, oh yes, I mean the way healthcare has unraveled and evolved. I say evolved and unraveled, is that the incentives are just all wrong for the overall cost of healthcare to be under control. All of the incentives are to put an upward thrust on healthcare costs. The way it's been designed and the way it's evolved, so that hospitals are busily looking to see what tests you could qualify for, not necessarily the tests that you need or the ones that are cost effective, but what are the tests that you qualify for under the standards for insurance and Medicare. And if you qualify for a test, you can be pretty damn sure that the hospital is going to decide you need it, and you'll have it. And some of them are very expensive. And the same is true with medicine, with the way we've set up our patent system and the way we've allowed big pharma to charge exorbitant prices for medicine that way exceed the cost. And the argument by big pharma is, well, you need to let us recover these costs because otherwise we won't do this research to find the next expensive form of medication. But if you get into if someone did a PhD thesis on where healthcare costs, where big pharma focuses its research, they basically focus their research on chronic diseases and medication that can mitigate chronic disease, not so much cure it, but mitigate it. Because as far as big pharma is concerned, there's nothing better than somebody who has a chronic disease, who has many years of life expectancy ahead of them, who has to take this medicine every day for the rest of their life. I mean, that sounds like it was a program or a requirement designed by a marketing team, right?
So, Sandy, if at the root of our medical system is profit, how do you get around that?
Well, it wouldn't be bad. It wouldn't be so bad if, I mean, I think having something rooted in profit, or at least the ability to earn enough money
It's not a bad
out
thing.
of it to cover its costs. But the problem is that the demand side, the payors, the people who are making the decision on what it is that should be provided in the way of healthcare, there is no cost discipline built into that side of the ledger, because all of them have an incentive for the insurance premiums to get higher, the price of big pharma goods to get higher, the price of medical services to become higher. I mean, if you're a provider, you aren't interested in cutting prices if you can recover higher prices. I mean, here's a choice. You can cut your price and receive a lower profit, or you can increase your price and receive a higher profit because the market isn't going to penalize you for raising your price. Well, that's a formula for higher prices. And that's essentially the current system. And that's what bothers me about everybody in Washington right now looking at the healthcare system, because it's the fundamental healthcare system that's broken. And it's fundamental changes that need to be made. The Republican side of the ledger is just talking about eliminating subsidies, but they aren't talking about how they're going to replace the subsidies with a program that actually provides service on a basis that makes it available to Tom, Dick, and Mary. And the Democrats' answer is to increase the subsidies, but that doesn't introduce cost control into the system, which is what's driving the cost of Medicare, medical services up. And
So, Sandy,
so, there are countries, we could look around the world and find examples of places that have done a much better job of, one, providing quality health care, and two, controlling the cost of health care.
Sandy, the picture you just painted, we just came out of a government shutdown, and January is around the corner, so they put a band-aid on it, and they're going to have to come back and deal with what was the rationale for shutting it down a month and a half ago. In what, less than 30 days or a little bit more, another 40 days, they're going to be right back where they were. How is it possible to fix what it is we're talking about when you put all these levers around it's not an easy issue to fix. Can it be fixed?
Well, it certainly can be fixed. Can is that question the teacher always says, well, can you do this, Johnny? And you say, yes, I can do it. Oh, will you do it, Johnny? No, I don't think so. Okay, so that's pretty much what's happening in Washington. Can they fix it? Yes. Will they fix it? It's not very likely, if unless they get a lot of political backbone, and the backbone will have to come from the voters who essentially rise up and revolt over what's happening to the costs. I mean, the Republican answer of withdrawing subsidies from the insurance arena will drive up the cost of health care for the people who don't receive subsidies, because the insurance pool will get smaller, and the insurance premiums to be paid by those who do have insurance will go up. And it's not an answer, because the insurance programs still have built into them an incentive for the premiums to go up, not down, unless somebody exerts third-party control over this process of third-party payors and what the system has built into it for incentives. Um, and so the Democratic side, which is to increase the subsidies, is the short-term solution to the existing program, because if you need to have accessibility to healthcare and you have the program we have, and the cost of healthcare insurance is beyond the reach of people, making therefore healthcare inaccessible, the only answer to that is subsidizing those who have to buy healthcare insurance so they can pay the higher price. But in the long run, that does not fix the problem of healthcare chewing up our GDP and being a terrible burden on the people and the economy.
So, Sandy, here's one of my major concerns. You just said that the way to fix it is for the American people to bring pressure on our elected officials to do the right thing. But the American people don't understand. You have just laid out at the root of what the issue is. It's pretty technical, Sandy. I mean, the average rank and file American who's dealing with just trying to survive doesn't understand those intricacies of
Well,
the way you just laid it out.
well, they don't. I don't think they have to understand the intricacies. What they have to understand is that they will revolt because their cost of health insurance has flown up to the, coming out of their pocket, 15 or 18 or 20 or $25,000 a year, and they can't do it and they
which is
can't afford
frightening.
it. And so they're saying, look, this system doesn't work. And, if it's a subsidy I need, then give me the subsidy. But if the subsidy becomes unbearable as far as the government cost is concerned, then people better turn around and look for another answer. And, I think there are answers. I've mentioned to you, I think, long ago when we were on the radio, the show, the system that Singapore has. And a couple of other countries have adopted, which is derived primarily from at least relying on health savings accounts for everybody, so that everybody is at least making their first medical expense decisions, the ones that are the first $20,000 or $25,000 a year, they're making it out of their own pocket, or at least a purse of that they control that is dedicated to medical costs and will be diminished if they pay too much. And so, if we could introduce cost control and cost discipline into the system, so we had a marketplace that actually had this price discipline built into it, we could begin to realize a reduction in the relative cost of healthcare in our economy.
So, Sandy, if we have our own individual finances geared towards our health care, is that long term? So that would be computed or calculated based on your age, and you get this what while you're a child,
No, no. What I mean, currently we have health savings accounts that we can fund. Yeah, every one of us under the federal tax law. And a health savings account can be funded. I think if you're single, you can fund it to the level of $3,750 a year, and if you're
oh, but
married,
we
you
pay
can
for that out
fund
of
it
our
to
own pocket.
7,500.
We
It
pay for that
comes
out of
it
our own
comes out of
pocket.
your income in the same way
Oh,
that a 401k does,
okay, okay,
but it's not taxed. So if you take it out of your income and fund it in HSA, you don't pay income tax or state income
okay.
tax on the funding of your HSA plan. And then your HSA fund is much like a 401k. You can invest it in various kinds of investments, and it will grow over time. So let's say beginning at age 25, you get a job and you decide to exercise the discipline of savings, and you put some money into your 401k and you fully fund your health savings account. By the time you're 40, a married couple could have hundreds of thousands of dollars of HSA funds. Okay. Now, you don't want to have your all of your health care covered by a health savings account. So, like in Singapore, what happens is the first money you pay in a year for your medical care comes out of your health savings account. But if you have to spend more than $20,000 or $25,000 in a year for your health, then there's another tranche, another level of coverage, which would be like extraordinary uh, insurance. It's
Right.
like the
Cancer or something.
it's extraordinary care insurance. So you'd have insurance that you'd have to buy that would be the premiums would be measured by the risk of you having to experience a significant health problem, not just the rudimentary kind that
Right.
everybody has on a regular basis, but an extraordinary problem. And extraordinary health insurance is much, much, much cheaper, particularly at a younger age.
Right.
And so you could be in a situation where you would be making the healthcare decisions about the tests you receive and the medical care you receive for the first 25 or $30,000 a year, and after that, you'd have insurance. And if you couldn't afford to fund your health savings account, then those who are particularly low income would have the health savings account funded for them by the federal government. And however, it would be theirs to make decisions about with respect to their health care. It can only be used for health care, and the decisions to be made for it would be made by individuals. Now, I'm sure there would be a whole network of counselors a whole business that would develop that would provide consultation advice to people on how to spend money out of their health savings account to preserve it, to optimize it, to make sure that you get the health care you need. And all of that would totally change because right now we don't have anybody looking out for the interests of one, the cost of health care, or two, looking out seriously for the interest of Tom, Dick, and Mary. You know, the the insurance company is perfectly willing to say no to you. They don't really care about anything other than that your health care is predictable next year and that premiums keep going up by those who they insure. And the medical provider is interested in selling you medical service, kind of whether you need it or not.
So Sandy, as complex as that sounds, it clearly might be the best option than what we're talking about now. If you look at technology and the advancements and even what AI is doing in the medical field and industry, they're going to continue to come up with all of these new technical advances that are going to cost even more and more money, and it's going to continue to, the way things are now. We can't live with the way things are now, right? I mean, the changes have to be forthcoming. Is that?
Well, yes, I think there has to be changes. And I think the problem is Washington is always so invested in the status quo. You know, the status quo has lobbyists. All the business that exists today have lobbyists and people protecting their interest. I mean, just look at the coal industry. The coal industry, people trying to save the coal industry in spite of the fact that it's in an inevitable decline. The status quo has lobbyists. The status quo has employees who are interested in maintaining their jobs. The status quo is represented by the people who own businesses and have an interest in continuing their profits. The future doesn't have a lobbyist. The future doesn't have that kind of a stake in our political game, which is one of the reasons why a country like the United States, we end up being stuck with status quo systems and not a lot of dynamic effort is made, at least by the government, in towards shifting to the future. You can see what happened with electric vehicles. Um, but with respect to healthcare, I think the pressure is going to develop significantly with respect to political pressure simply based on economics and the unsustainability of the current trajectory of our system, which is that medical care is slowly eating its way through the GDP to the point where everyone will be doctors or patients or medical providers of some kind or patients in our economy, which is not realistic and not sustainable. Now,
Sandy.
well,
Yeah.
one thing you mentioned that this health savings account thing is complicated. Actually, it's much simpler than the current system. If if we create a mechanism for people to make their own decisions about healthcare, and an industry develops with artificial intelligence could well become a significant assistant to each of us as we make our medical decisions, because we could probably ask our AI consultant a lot of questions that would help us decide who we ought to see, what we ought to get done, what we ought to spend on something, what a fair price is. I mean, the fact is that there are going to become tools in the future that could make the system much more responsive.
Sandy, it, it's not imminent. I guess the downfall of our healthcare system is not going to happen tomorrow, but clearly in my life span, the time that we have left, we're not going to see the collapse of it. But certainly, it's inevitable that it can't maintain itself the way it's situated now. So
Well,
you
it's much
you
more. I think it's more inevitable than you think, Earl, because I think when the shoe hits the floor with respect to this increase in when the subsidies, if the subsidies are dropped from the Obamacare plan, and if healthcare insurance premiums escalate at the rate that they're projected to escalate, if that happens, and even if it doesn't happen, the rate at which premiums are escalating is such that there's going to be millions of people in this country who will experience the financial difficulty of not being able to pay insurance premiums and having to be uninsured in a situation in which being uninsured for medical problems is much too risky for people to bear.
So, Sandy, if what you are saying is true, and I have no reason to doubt you, then this should almost be a priority one for our government.
Well, Barack Obama, to his credit, they saw the problem of pre-existing conditions and the inability of people to get coverage. So that at that point, the belief was that the problem in the country for healthcare was that those who had a pre-existing condition were left out of the system because they could not afford health insurance and they couldn't afford health care either. Now I think the realization is much more profound, and that is that the without the mandate that was built into the Obamacare system, that was designed to keep insurance premiums at an affordable level because the insurance pool would include everyone. We no longer have that mandate, and as a result, we have a system that tends to insure those who are sicker and not to have insurance for those who are in better health. And so we have this escalating cost problem. And I think the new realization is that, and in the 1990s, employers were tracking the cost of healthcare, and they were pointing with alarm at the fact that their rate of inflation of healthcare was much higher than the general rate of inflation, and that it was eating a significantly bigger percentage of the costs of any business. And so they were ringing the alarm bells, but we were all covered. All of us were experiencing the benefit of coverage, and we weren't experiencing the detriment of this increase in cost. That's when the employers passed the cost on, or at least sharing the cost onto employees. Now employees began to experience the problem, and now they're experiencing it in spades. And I think that if there's a silver lining to this, it's that maybe it's going to open the eyes of the country to the fact that we have an unsustainable architecture for the way we deliver healthcare in America. And anybody who goes to sit, if you're sitting in a waiting room or you're talking to a nurse as you're sitting, a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant or even the doctor, ask them if they don't think that the healthcare system is broken and broken badly. And all of them will shake their head yes, and they'll tell you why.
So, Sandy, you correct me because what I'm seeing is this is a business. Healthcare is a business. The hospitals are business. We live in a state, and really, Sandy, kind of you and I in a city where there's the development that's taking place at one of the hospitals in our city is unbelievable. The amount of money that's being spent at that site, and it's just I don't know how it can be sustainable, but all shiny and brand new and the bill. If so, where's that money coming from, Sandy?
Well, it's always going to be a business, okay? And if we need to run it as a business, because if it's a business, then people will recognize where something is needed, where we need to invest money to meet the need. It will also recognize where things aren't needed, and will avoid wasting money investing in those areas. That would be the case, particularly in a circumstance in which the business was responding to a marketplace where the marketplace was exercising discipline about what they were willing to pay for, what they needed to pay for, what they should pay for it. And that's the problem with the current business, is the people paying the bills are not behaving like competitive business people. They're behaving in a completely different fashion. They're responding to the incentives that exist in the unusual market in which they operate, which is this health insurance marketplace. And the government, which is responsible for about 50% of, at least I think, of the expenditures through Medicare and Medicaid, the lobbyists have been actively taking steps to make sure that the people who are responsive to them, the legislators, uh, don't allow too much competition to exist or too much pressure to exist from the government as the payor. So what did they do? They told the government and required that the government not be able to negotiate very hard on prescription drugs. So what happened to the price of prescription drugs? It went way up in the United States as compared to other countries. uh, and how the medical services are allowed to be covered under Medicare and Medicaid. The process for securing approval for those is basically only dependent on proof that the medical service, diagnostic service, or medical care is efficacious, that it works. And if it works, there's very little price negotiation about what it will cost. So, I mean, if you open the bill that is sent to Medicare and it reports to you what the government paid as compared to what you would have paid if you weren't insured, you realize that there's just enormous prices being paid for things like courses of chemotherapy, where the cost of the product is very, very low, and the price for it is hundreds of thousands of dollars a year.
So, Sandy, who's going to force them to treat it as a business? The taxpayers can't do it.
Well, no, no,
So,
no, no, the taxpayers have to do it. The government has to be given the backbone to make decisions that run contrary to the interest of the status quo being the insurance industry and the medical providing industry, who are doing quite well under the existing system. They're doing so well that they're eating up 20% of the GDP. Now, are the doctors doing well? No, not so much. They're all being bought by the hospital providers, and there's kind of three prongs. There's the medical insurance, there's the people who are packaging the medical insurance and doing the negotiating, and then there are the healthcare providers, the hospitals. And those three levels of healthcare are operating quite profitably because they aren't operating in a world in which costs are being required to be contained. And so we need to have a Congress that wakes up, starts responding to something other than the status quo lobbyists, and starts thinking about redesigning the American medical care system. I mean, it could be Medicare for all, but then you'd have to make sure that Medicare had negotiating teeth to make sure that they would negotiate in a rigorous basis for what they were willing to pay for health care and pharmaceuticals.
so Sandy, you make me think about the time. I know several years back you were in China. So China's got this billion three or billion five people of people. How do they handle healthcare?
Well, they provide it at the government level, but their government is a powerful one that is exerting a great deal of probably power over what kind of medical service is available to everybody.
So
You
they're
know
not
what?
getting what they're not getting the quality of what we get.
I can't tell you that. I think that they have some hospitals that are of very high quality, but I can't tell you exactly how they
Right,
determine which medical services are covered and which aren't. And there are people, there are places where the government basically pays the price of medical care that is then provided by the private industry. Okay, and that's essentially like our Medicare for all model would be. When you have Medicare, the government isn't providing you the health care; they're only providing you the insurance to cover the cost of health care. In a large number of countries, the government both provides the health care and covers its cost. And in those places, there's probably a fair amount of rationing that goes on as to how they ration the health care that they provide. People in Canada who have that kind of a system could complain that they have long lines they have
right.
to wait behind in order to get the health care they want. Now, that's kind of the case in the United States. Call up your internist and get an appointment for next week. Yeah, it's not going to happen. But the United States has options, and the options could be like the Singapore system. It could be like a Medicare for all system in which the government, however, does exercise actual cost discipline with respect to disciplining the marketplace that it's paying the prices for. But we don't have either one of those systems right now.
So Sandy, the stand that the Republican Party has taken in this um, is going to have to change. There are no smoke and mirrors that they can tell people the Democrats failed on this and we're going to fix. Smoke and mirrors aren't going to work, are they?
No, I know, and they can't keep going the way they're going because, like I said, all the incentives in the status quo, the vested interests are all creating a trajectory for the cost of healthcare in this country that's not sustainable. So I would say that both sides have to change their song. And the fact is that this insurance process, the Obamacare plan, was really a design plan designed after the Massachusetts program. The Massachusetts program was a Republican-based program, and it was
Mitt Romney.
installed by Mitt Romney in Massachusetts based on the Republican pressure, which was primarily premised on the status quo health insurers saying, hey, there can be a system that has health care for all, but it has to be through us, okay? And if it's through us, we won't get in the way of that. And if it's basically mandated, that's even better. And so perfect. And so Massachusetts adopted that program. But when we tried to adopt it at the national level, the mandate fell away, and the mandate was the linchpin for that kind of a system potentially working. Uh, so without a mandate, we need to go back and revisit just exactly what the design of the architecture is for healthcare in America. And, we don't have to eliminate private hospitals, but we probably have to take a really hard look at the health insurance industry. And almost everyone in Washington who will talk to you about this on a private basis will tell you that the boogeyman in the healthcare business is the health insurance industry and the status quo system we have that's dependent upon it. And if the Republicans only want to withdraw subsidies from the healthcare insurance system, but leave the healthcare insurance system intact, uh, the system remains completely broken.
So, Sandy, if I'm hearing you right, the health insurance industry is waxing wealthy by the way things are now. And they're not in any rush or any hurry to do what would be the right thing for the American people by cutting into the enormous profits that they're making.
Well, nobody likes change, particularly people who are succeeding in the current system, and change reflects only a risk and not a possibility of a better profit line. And so, yeah, there's a great deal of resistance to change in the current system. Now, hospitals could thrive under a different system, but they would have to exercise a great deal of cost control and cost constraints that they don't currently have to use based on the way they can forecast revenue and the way they obtain revenue from the insurance system. And it permits them to make massive investments like the ones you've described. You can only make massive investments if you can look forward in time and the risk reward measures up well enough to make the investment and take the risk because the reward is certain enough and great enough to justify it. And
So,
so, yes, I think we would have a system that would possibly be somewhat less dynamic in terms of being able, we frequently brag about being able to provide the most sophisticated health care in the world. And that's undoubtedly true. I mean, Switzerland, a couple of countries can rival us, but it's undoubtedly quite true. But the problem is that the cost of our health care is unsustainably high, and the availability of our health care to Tom, Dick, and Mary doesn't measure well across, if you compare it to the rest of the world at all, because people can't afford to even go to their internist to find out what's wrong with their throat.
Sandy, the technology that's in the hospitals and whatever the latest is, they have it. It's kind of
Yep.
like every year you see a brand new BMW and you just bought one the year before. and you thought it's just, oh, it's just spectacular, and then a year later they've got some different changes in it, and you say, oh man, I thought I just had, but you can't continue to keep up with the growth of the technology, and yet the hospitals are, and in order to have and own all that stuff, they need to have people who are coming in using it, right?
Yes, and one of the breakthroughs. I mean, the sophistication of healthcare in America took a rapid move upstream towards much more sophisticated healthcare when Medicaid and Medicare came into being, because the medical system could complain, well, they didn't pay 100 cents on the dollar. No, but what they did do is they created a clientele who would pay for anything that was efficacious, anything that could be proven to be effective, regardless of its price or cost, became approved for Medicare and Medicaid coverage. And so we began to get very sophisticated apparatus that was very expensive, and it was designed because it would be, and the GE and others were spending the money to do the research on it because they knew that the costs, regardless of how expensive it would turn out to be, would be recovered in this system. And there's obviously some merit to having a system that will support that kind of sophisticated hardware and sophisticated process. But we have to find a happy medium here, and we have to find something that both supports sophisticated care and controls the cost. And I believe that one of the ways to handle that will be to put much more of the decision making into the hands of the patients, the people who will receive the medical care, who will ask questions about how much do I need this? What difference will it make in my life? How much will it cost? How much will it deplete my health savings account? And I think that once that's introduced, we can at least begin to start to get a handle on it.
So, Sandy, let me just say how fortunate I've been in my life in being born at the right time. I have always had insurance. My father worked, and so as a young boy, my family, we always had insurance because the company that he worked at had insurance. Then I wound up as an adult walking into a unionized shop, as you talked about. Health insurance came with the job, so I had health insurance all the way up until the time, um, I became eligible for Social Security, and now I have health care coverage because I mean Medicare,
Yeah.
because of Medicare. So I haven't been without health care coverage. I've been very fortunate, Sandy. I'll tell you, I could not afford, if there wasn't Medicare, I don't know where I'd be right now.
Well, that I
I'm
mean,
one of those people. I'm one of those
Medicare
people.
was adopted because the world and the government came to the realization that health insurance would be unaffordable for the elderly because the elderly are almost certain to get sick and
Right,
require it, right? We're almost certain to incur I wasn't incurring medical costs at all during my active youth up until
right,
age 65. I probably had $10,000 total of medical care. Since then, that's become a small number annually for what at least the hospital would charge for what it is that I'm incurring.
right.
And so Medicare, yes, there's no question that Medicare is a necessary provision if we believe that health care should be available to the elderly. But um, and yes, those of us who are our age never did experience the implications of the cost of health care because almost all of us had that kind of Blue Cross Blue Shield
Right.
health care provided by the employer, and we stepped from that into Medicare, and we never really had to experience these huge contributions. First of all, today most people who get health care from their employer are asked to contribute 30 to
Yeah,
50% of the
it's weird.
premiums
It's
every
unbelievable.
year, and they have deductibles like we never saw. And so, it's pretty standard for a family of four to have to experience 18 to $20,000 of healthcare costs in a year before they get
Yeah,
essentially any dollars
right.
of insurance coverage. So that's a far different burden that healthcare is putting on Tom, Dick, and Mary today than it did in the past. And that number's only going up. It's not going down. And that's why I say that, if we wanted people in Washington to worry about things that they ought to be worrying about instead of carrying out experiments with tariff policies and foreign exploits and the rest of it, what we really need to get them to refocus on are the couple of things that really matter to us. And one of them in particular, the freight train that keeps on chugging along towards that cliff that it's going to run off of, is the healthcare freight train.
Sandy, man, it is so good to hear your voice and your voice of reasoning applied to what is happening in our government today. And I am forever thankful and grateful that you and I have crossed paths because you explain it in a manner, Sandy, that even the talking heads on television don't explain it. And even though, we've just for the last hour talked about healthcare, we still just scratched the surface, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact is, you get into the details, but I mean, there's this simple concept. Well, first of all, I would think that those in Congress would run around the world and look at other programs that are being carried out around the world to try and figure out what best practices are, because Americans will frequently say we're the greatest and we've got the best, we're the best at everything. But only a fool would describe the American healthcare system in its entirety as the best in the world. We might have the best and most sophisticated healthcare that we can provide to people in the world, but we don't have the best system with respect to how it's putting a burden on our economy, on the GDP. We don't have the best system with respect to how it's available to Tom, Dick, and Mary. And so, yeah, I would say that uh, if the people who hear this think about it, what they should do is turn their guns on Washington and the legislature and say, "Hey, wake up! Let's talk about health care."
So I know we have to bring it into it, Sandy, but before I do that, Sandy Williams for president. Yay!
Yeah,
Uh,
that would take it to a whole new age, literally.
but my friend, it is so good having these dialogues with you. We're going to increase it, as we move forward our conversations because I think it is absolutely necessary in these times that I get you before this audience more often if you're willing to accept that invitation as we move forward. But
Sure, it's
always good talking to you, my friend.
yeah,
It
good
is,
seeing you, good talking to you, and go Bucks.
yeah. Now, we'll see you soon. Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
All right, that's the one and only Sandy Williams on what's going on with Earl Ingram. See you guys later.